For number 5, we're estimating square roots. So if you remember, we did this in class yesterday and we used a visual. So I'm going to use the visual. If you can go straight to the answer, that's fine. But if you're watching this video, I'm hoping that it's because you need help and that the visual will help you. So we are estimating to the nearest 10th place. So remember, that's just, we need to make sure that we, in the 10th place, show whether the number is closer to the lower integer or the upper integer. So we're starting out with the square root of 3. So first we ignore the square root if you're looking at a number line. And we will just say, okay, well, I'm just going to look at 3. So there's my number line, there's the middle. So we need to ask ourselves, what two perfect squares is 3 in between? So 1 is a perfect square, and 4 is a perfect square. So 3 is between 1 and 4. Remember, if you don't know your perfect squares, you can always generate a list. Start out with 1, square it. That's 1. That's a perfect square. 2, square it. That's 4. So that's a perfect square. 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, etc. And that will generate your list of numbers. You don't have to have the table that we wrote down in class. So we know that the number we're dealing with is 3, and it's between the perfect squares 1 and 4. So we're going to put that on our number line. And then we need to ask ourselves, well, which is 3 closer to? Is it closer to 1 or is it closer to 4? And it's closer to 4. Now be careful here. It's not going to be super close to 4 like that in this big of number line anyway, because we don't have a lot of digits in between there. Okay, it's only 2 units away from 1, and it's 1 unit away from 4. So it's actually pretty close to the middle, okay, but a little to the right. Or you can put it a little bit further there, little to the right of that center. So I'll label that as 3. Now remember, we are not actually talking about 1, 3, and 4. We're talking about the square roots. So we get to put square roots on all these guys. So since this 3 is between 4 and 1, then the square root of 3 is between the square root of 1 and the square root of 4, which means it's in between the two integers 1 and 2. So those are actually 1 and 2 here. And then so the middle would be 1.5, and we can see that square root of 3 is to the right of there. Okay, so a good estimate for the square root of 3 would be I would say about 1.7. On my number line I should have put it over a little bit more, but 1.6, 1.7 I would accept, but 1.7 is going to be the best estimate there. So the square root of 3 is approximately 1.7. We'll do another one in part B. And this one we have the square root of 60. So same idea, we're going to look at 60 and we're going to draw the number line like we did before with our endpoints and then about the middle. And again, we're going to ask ourselves, what two perfect squares is 60 between? So if we list out our perfect squares, again, just take a number, square it, and that'll be a perfect square. So I'm at 6 squared, 7 squared, 8 squared will be 64, 9 squared is 81. I already see too that 60 is in between. So we can see in our list that it's in between 49 and 64. So 49 is a smaller one, and then 64. So on our number line, 49, 64. And then we need to place 60 on the number line. So from 49 to 64 we have 15 units. Okay, and this is 4 units away from 64, and 49 is 11 units from 60. So 60 is 11 units from 49. So it's going to be to the right of the middle. Okay, it's going to be closer to 64. And I would say, imagine this is cut up into 15 pieces, so I would say it would land about right here. So 60 would be about right there. So then again, we're not looking at 60, we're looking at the square root of 60. So we get to put square roots on each of these guys. So since 60 is in between 49 and 64, the square root of 60 is in between the square root of 49 and the square root of 64. And we know the square root of 49 is 7, and the square root of 64 is 8. So when we're looking at the square root of 60, okay, this middle point would be 7.5. We know that it's more than 7.5, so it's closer to 8. So I would say about 7.7 would be a good estimate for the square root of 60, or 7.6 even, or 7.8, but 7.7 is a pretty good estimate there for the square root of 60. And that is it for number 5.